Last video, I did a surface level talk about the remaster of Epic Mickey. What it did well, versus what the original did better. A few changes I noticed, and so on and so forth. However, I have to admit, that video was made before I finished the remaster. I was on Petronic, I think, when I made the video. I suppose you could say I was a little impatient about wanting to gush about the game. And after finishing it and starting a New Game Plus file, I think I still have a little bit more to talk about. A bit of expanding. A rebrush of my own work, so to speak. So right off the bat, I want to talk about a couple nitpicks of mine, a few new ones. Throughout Epic Mickey, you fight against two main enemy types, the Blotlings and the Beetleworks, and various different types of them as well, which is where my issue comes from. Well, calling it an issue might be a bit too strong for me, so let's just call it something I've noticed for now, okay? They've gotten easier in the remaster, and considerably so. Each enemy type. The Slobber is the biggest offender of this, actually. It starts out as a mini-boss you fight in the Great Big Tomorrow level, so you would think, at least for that version of it, the game would treat it like a boss. But comparing the Rebrushed Slobber to the original, it's clear that the AI for it has been changed substantially. It attacks less often, it's easily distracted by other friendly Blotlings, and easily gets caught in the loop of using the one attack you need it to use in order to damage it. I went into the boss fight at the Great Big Tomorrow, expecting to take a hit or two, spend about, say, 5 minutes on it, and then win. However, with no prep time, it took about 3 minutes to no-hit the boss, because it kept using its thinner spit than suction attack, which is the one you need it to use to actually damage it, because the Slobber is unique among the Blotlings. You can't just damage it just by shooting it. It has to open its mouth and try to suck you in, and then it would rake at you with claws in the Wii. And now, the quickness of it could be because they fixed the frame dropping issue that the Wii had, where it would take longer to paint or thin enemies, but still, it feels like a blink and you miss it fight every time you see them too. I had to not attack and wait about 5 minutes for it to start using different attacks. Let me repeat that. 5 whole minutes. And you may think I'm exaggerating, but no, on stream, I was like, guys, I swear, it uses different attacks than this. And I had to jump onto it, jump on its head, bounce around it, and then it would finally start using its claws. And this may seem negative, and you'd be right. The Slobber AI seems a bit lacking. Honestly, I find it about as annoying as a well-placed Seer, which is the lowest tier Blotling. It's the first one you see, first enemy in the game. And overall, all of the Blotlings just seem easier, and I'm not sure if that's because they've changed their AI or the way that the friendly Blotlings attack and function, since they now paint in enemies and are slightly more aggressive, or that teleportation they do to make sure that they don't go out of bounds, or you can't lock them in a corner or something, or it's the frame rate issue that the Wii had sometimes that I've already mentioned, but they just seem easier, and it's like, not too bad, because I don't want to say that easier is worse, but easier in this case was definitely a bit lacking. Now, the Beetleworks, which are the second enemy type, are mechanical entities, as opposed to the pseudo-organic nature of the Blotlings, and it was always an interesting concept to me. They aren't made of toon, they're made of inert, which is what non-toon, non-thinnable objects are called in the world of Wasteland. A good example of an inert object would be the barrels that you can break, or just the ground you're walking on usually. Since they aren't made of toon, paint does next to nothing, but it gums up their gears, moving parts, and it slows them down overall. They move a little slower, they attack a little slower, but it makes them significantly harder if you're doing the good guy route, with bosses, using only paint against them, and it adds a nice enemy variety where you can't use the same strategies over and over again, in theory. And in the Wii, they were definitely some of the harder enemies to deal with. They were always placed in areas where they would have the advantage. They programmed never to walk into thinner pools or over them, and they're very chunky, so you didn't really have a way to knock them into a thinner pool. There were very few ways you could actually cheat them. You couldn't kill them with an anvil. You could probably kill a hopper with the anvil. Maybe a sweeper, not a sweeper, sorry, a spinner if you're lucky, but that wouldn't do much against the bashers or the tankers, to my knowledge. And the TVs would just take them down a health bar, it would draw their aggro, but they would attack it and blow up the TV. They wouldn't get distracted like the Blootlings do. However, they also seem to be easier in the remaster, and again, significantly so. And I don't know what it is. I've done a bit of experimenting and I do not know. It could be that I've gotten better at the games, the frame rate issue I've mentioned a couple times already, or that their AI was changed to be slightly more suitable for the new UI and all that, but it feels significantly easier to fight them. Spinner is a great example. On the Wii, if you approached them wrong after thinning out their shell, they would still hurt you. You would still take a pip of damage, it would knock you backwards, and that was just by approaching them from the back wrong. There was a specific way you had to go about hitting them, you had to manage distance well between them, and etc. There was a lot of things you had to do. But in the remastered spinners, they're super easy. They're super simple to deal with. I don't think I got hit by any Beetleworks other than the single tanker in Space Voyage. The spinners are very lenient. The bashers are also super lenient. And the bashers used to be pretty hard to deal with in the Wii. They had long range, their hitboxes were kind of whack, and they would just spin around and be like a Beyblade and a maelstrom of death. They don't repaint themselves right away if you miss the spin move. This goes for every Beetleworks. All the Beetleworks feel more lenient that way. If you thin out their armor, and you can wait. You can wait about, I want to say, 30 seconds to a minute, and they won't repaint. They'll just wait for you to hit them. They'll still attack, but they'll do their, oh, you can hit me now attacks. The bashers, you can hit me now attack, admittedly, is still pretty hard to dodge, but I never had a problem with it because that's more clearly telegraphed in the remaster as well. The tanker is the only one who feels almost identical to the way it used to be, but it still even feels a little easier just because of that thinning the paint, and then it just stays in that state for a little bit longer. And I'm really not sure why that is, because several of the bosses feel just as hard or even harder than before. So they didn't tweak the difficulty of the overall game, but overall all of the standard enemies are pretty much non-threats the entire time, which is a little disappointing, I won't even lie. There's never really a sense of tension, because you can just spin move all of the Blootlings away. They don't hit you before you spin move. There's no penalty for doing that. Even the sweeper, whose whole point was if you got close, it would sweep you over edges, didn't do that. And I would routinely spin move them off cliffs because I thought it was funny. But you aren't supposed to be able to do that easily, especially not with 2 or 3 of them in the same area. Now, I've talked about the flaws of this game, and flaws is, again, a heavy word, but I've talked about it for a bit, so let me go on to some positive notes, if I may. So in my first video, I discussed how the clock tower had new life breathed into it. New attacks, new AI, and even different timings for its attacks, and for painting its hands. And all of these are very, very welcome changes. I genuinely enjoy this fight so much, like, I cannot overstate how much this fight was fun, it was refreshing, and I'll say it's probably one of, if not my favorite bosses in the remaster, and I was not expecting that at all. If anything, I was expecting the remastered Shadow Blot to be my favorite, but it wasn't. The gear attack, combined with the more frantic, fast-paced aura the fight has, makes the paint path so much more rewarding. It's easily 3 to 4 times as hard as the thinner path, but thinner being easier than paint is a constant theme in Epic Mickey. It's the path of least resistance. It's far easier to destroy and ruin than to create and inspire. To save is far more laborious than to abandon and leave in ruins. I'm sure speedruns will use thinner as in like 90% of the boss fights, simply because of how much quicker and expedient it is. The only boss I can think of where they wouldn't would be the Captain Hook fight, because I think paint is just genuinely faster. The Clock Tower goes from a 4 to 7 minute boss fight to a 3 to 5 depending on the choice of paint or thinner in it. Speed isn't the only thing though, because of the game's morality system, where depending on what quests you take, which you do and which you don't, the way you handle bosses or scenarios, really determines how Mickey leaves Wasteland. You get to choose, and it makes a genuine difference. You get different dialogue, people talk to you differently. New doors open and close depending on who you side with and who you choose to ignore. Different pins, different extra content is available if you do different things. And the ending cutscene is just made a bit different by the end, reflecting who you are, what you did, and what you chose. The mood of the ending is always happy because there is a consistent storyline throughout the game no matter what you do, but it can be tinged by sorrow, grief, and loss. The other bosses, other than the Clock Tower, have little to no changes that I haven't already discussed, but I can still hit the highlights after all. The Shadow Blot is treated more like a slobber. It's easier to goad into his airstrike attack by shooting with either paint or thinner in the Wii. It summons hordes of reinforcements whether you paint them or not, which as far as I remember in the Wii, it had a soft cap of how many enemies could be on the plateau at any given time, and it would rectify that by having it charge across the screen, killing them. The tendrils that used to pop out of the ground during its suction slobber attack are gone, they don't exist. And he doesn't swipe at you as often as he used to, regardless of how close you are to him. Petronic attacks a bit more frantically than he used to, as well as he stomps a bit more frequently. He does his ground pound-esque attack. Petronic's attacks are a bit more frantic. The disc speeds up each time you hit it, which while it did on the Wii, it also kind of had a soft cap because it would just hit you. Captain Hook is the same as far as I can tell. Though I will admit, I did only use the paint path on him. I have not done thinner, which I know there are 2 different ways you can beat him with thinner. Knocking him off the plank, or literally just breaking him to pieces by slamming him against the walls of his ship. If any of you know any differences between the Captain Hook boss fight between the Wii and the remaster, I'd love to hear about it from you. Please, comment below. I'm always interested to learn about what they've changed about this game. That's why I have almost 20 hours in it already. Aside from AI, UI, and graphic changes, there are a couple small tweaks to Wasteland I'd like to discuss and share my thoughts on. I already talked about the different extra content in here, the new film reel locations. So the first of things I'd like to talk about today are consumable changes. But first I'm going to explain what I'm counting as a consumable, because I know that like power sparks and film reels, e-tickets, health ups, and refills are all consumables. But I'm only going to be talking about e-tickets and health ups, because they are the only ones with real differences, other than small graphical changes. The new e-tickets have different colors. The e-tickets used to be red, blue, white, and gold. White or silver, I couldn't tell. The cheat book described it as white, but also it would sometimes call it silver. But regardless, it's now blue, green, red, and gold. Not in that order. I believe the order is red, blue, green, and gold from Money Rise. It's a small change. It doesn't really matter. It's just something I've noticed that changed. I don't have any real thoughts on it either way. Probably for consistency purposes, though I did make a bunch of Canadian money jokes when I first saw them on stream. Though, on the topic of money, the remaster does get rid of the cumbersome wallet capacity upgrades, which I may say, very nice. Very, very nice. Now you don't have to worry about wasting e-tickets by not upgrading your wallet capacity and running into a jackpot, buying or earning more capacity. It's all already there. Mickey must have bought a Ridge wallet to Wasteland. I'm not sponsored. The health is what went through a more drastic change appearance-wise. No longer a frame that resembles Mickey's iconic outline. Instead, it's a basic head shape, which I mean, okay. It's not a big deal, it doesn't bother me, but it bothers me. It bothers me a lot. Why would you remove it? It had such personality. It was fun, but now it's just kinda basic? You know? It's a small change that I dislike, but it doesn't really affect my opinion of the game. It just makes me a bit sad, you know? Just had kind of a personality I enjoyed. The entire game feels quite a bit easier, if I'm honest, which is both positive and negative in its own way. The platforming being significantly easier is a clear positive. Parts are still hard, but not impossible, and it's not the constant headache of trying to get the same jump over and over again, which ultimately makes the game experience far more fun. The 2D sections benefit from this greatly, specifically the 2D section that you have to take to get to the Shadow boss fight. It was kind of a nuisance. It was a nightmare to get through on the Wii because of the controls. So, positive change. But, conversely, all of the enemies are easier, like I discussed, which is to me a negative and a positive. Some enemies' bullshit RNG are kind of gone now, which is great, and that's a positive. Less RNG is better. Others have been reduced from fun and challenging to trivial, though, which takes away some of that sense of accomplishment you get from beating them. Overall, the game changes are positive, but there's enough negatives that I feel like I have to mention them if I'm talking about the game. It's enough where I needed to make this part 2, essentially, to fully flesh out my opinions on the game. A great example of being when you first meet Oswald. The storytelling is phenomenal. It's some of the best silent acting, and it's simply incredible. Like, genuinely, no notes, incredible silent voice acting. A great example of this being when you first meet Oswald, he creates a plan to get Mickey out of Wasteland by using the Moonliner rocket. But he suggests that he and Gus come along with Mickey in the rocket. Gus points out that only Mickey has a heart. You can't leave Wasteland without a heart because that means people remember you. And Oswald brushes it aside and looks away and kind of just goes, yeah, you know, whatever. And you immediately realize Oswald's plan. He wants to take Mickey's heart and leave Wasteland for the fame and glory he feels Mickey stole from him. You see it again in the ending cutscene. Mickey's heart drops down after you release the Blotticles. Oswald picks it up, and he looks at it. And then he looks back at Mickey, and looks back at the heart, and sighs. And he hands Mickey back his heart. Because over the course of the story, he stops resenting Mickey. He stops festering in his hatred and learns that Mickey didn't want to steal his fame. Mickey doesn't even realize he did that. And Mickey didn't want to ruin Wasteland. He owned up to it, and now he genuinely believes that it was an accident, and he stops hating him for it. He says, I used to think we were half-brothers, but I'd like to just call us brothers. There's genuine character development and empathy here. The characters have arcs. They live, and they learn. They have a personality. And it's made all so much more poignant by the choices you make and that beautiful ending cutscene where you get a play-by-play of your playstyle. Warren Spector and Junction Point Studios made a fantastic game for the Wii, and it was limited by what the Wii could do. THQ Nordic did a great job remaking it. A little thinner may have gotten on the final product, but overall the rebrushing was a success. Thank you so much for listening to my ramble. If you'd like, hit subscribe, hit the like button, and comment. I'd love to hear from you, and it really helps. This is my primary source of income, and I'm not making money off of it yet.